Spencer Penrose grew up in Philadelphia in a very prominent family. After he graduated from Harvard and moved to several places in the Southwest looking for job opportunities, ultimately ended up in Colorado Springs in 1892 and partnered up with his childhood friend Charlie Tutt from Philadelphia, who had arrived back in 1884. Julie Lewis McMillan came to Colorado Springs in 1900 with her husband James and their 2 children, after her husband had contracted tuberculosis while serving in the Spanish-American War. She ended up losing her husband as well as her son, but she and her daughter ended up staying here in Colorado Springs, and Julie ultimately married Spencer Penrose in 1906. Spencer Penrose was a wonderful philanthropist later in his life, but early on he was an astute businessman, a visionary, and foresaw the future of Colorado Springs as not only a great tourist resort, but as a great business opportunity for he and his associates. He built the world-renowned Broadmoor Hotel in 1918 and used the famous architects Warren and Wetmore, who had built Grand Central Station in New York, and the landscape architecture firm of Frederick Law Olmsted, who had just finished a great park called Central Park in New York. He built the road up Pikes Peak, and to celebrate that, he created what is now today the second oldest race in the United States, the Pikes Peak Hill Climb in 1916, in addition to the Cog Railway and the Incline. Julie, in contrast, had a great passion for the arts, particularly opera, and wanted to develop arts in Colorado the way she had enjoyed them in Detroit, Michigan, where she grew up. So together they formed a team of business, philanthropy, and appreciation for the arts and service for young people in our community. They built the Fine Arts Center, with Julie donating her McMillan home to the Fine Arts Center. They dedicated the hospital, Glockner Hospital, that ultimately became Penrose Hospital, and they built the Cheyenne Mountain Zoo. They decided very early on that they wanted everybody and anybody to come to the Pikes Peak region and enjoy the beautiful climate of Colorado. To do that, perhaps his greatest accomplishment was one of his very last, which was the creation of Pomar Foundation in 1937.
So Pomar was founded in 1937 by Spencer and Julie Penrose. They charged us with the mission to enhance, encourage, and promote the current and future well-being of the people of Colorado.
Pomar Foundation has grown a lot since it was first started in 1937. In the late 1930s, the trustees and the Penroses typically made less than a dozen grants. Now, the trustees make over 1,000 grants every year.
Anything we do through the foundation, we have in mind what honors the legacy of Spencer and Julie Penrose, whether through our grant making, our operating programs, or our historic properties.
In the 1930s, Spencer knew that he was dying of cancer, and so started to plan his burial project on Cheyenne Mountain. And to that end, he designed the Shrine of the Sun. The shrine is known as the Shrine of the Sun because of the extraordinary way the sunlight plays off of the tower at sunrise and sunset. In the winter of 1934, Spencer broke ground on the Shrine of the Sun, which was to be his burial ground and Julie's as well. And he enlisted the help of his architect and superintendent, who worked on other projects with him, to construct it out of Pikes Peak granite, which is the primary material that makes up Cheyenne Mountain. So the construction crew actually quarried Pikes Peak granite from Cheyenne Mountain about 700 feet away and hand chiseled all of the blocks that formed the tower. During construction of the Shrine of the Sun, Will Rogers died tragically in a plane crash in Alaska, and it was at that point that Spencer decided to dedicate the shrine in honor of the beloved American humorist.
Spencer Penrose, famous Coloradoan.
Will Rogers was humorous, philosopher, and friend to all mankind. He recognized the obligations of good citizenship and lived accordingly. I value his friendship and life and revere his memory. The Shrine of the Sun on Cheyenne Mountain is my tribute to Will Rogers, a memorial designed to keep alive forever the inspiration of a great American.
Will Rogers was a prolific actor, writer, radio personality and performer in the earlier part of the 20th century. He was a cultural icon in America. He was generous, relatable, funny. He was very humorous in his talkie films and on his radio broadcasts and in newspapers, and was really the only individual to dominate every form of popular media and entertainment back in his time. During his radio broadcast times, there were several churches that would actually report drops in attendance because people wanted to go listen to Will Rogers on the radio, and so they started broadcasting Will in church. He was that homey, that down to earth, and just that lovable.
You say you were born in the Indian Territory, and at that time they had no such thing as birth certificates? Then how are we to know of your birth?
But trying to gather from you that you doubt I was born. Of course, out in our country, if you walk up and appear before anybody in person, why, we take it as fairly positive proof that you must have been born.
But you are an American citizen.
Well, I think I am. Folks, Indian, both my mother and father had Cherokee blood in them. Born and raised in Indian Territory. Of course, I'm not these Americans whose ancestors come over on the Mayflower, but we met them at the boat when they landed. And it's always been to the everlasting discredit of the Indian race that we ever let them land. It was. I mean, that's the only thing I ever blame the Indians for.
Will Rogers grew up on his father's ranch in Indian Territory in what is now Oologah, Oklahoma. And there he developed his love of roping and pursued roping throughout his life, and it led him into his career as a performer and an actor. And he actually has a Guinness World Record for his roping skills for throwing 3 ropes at once. It's actually on his film, The Ropin' Fool, that he produced himself. In the later part of his life, during the rise of the Dirty 30s, Will was very popular for going on relief tours. And his relief tours could be compared to stand-up comedy today. And he would raise money for organizations such as the Red Cross or for schools, towns, and he even did relief tours overseas as well. Will Rogers died in a tragic plane accident with Wiley Post, who was on his way to Alaska to try and find a mail route between America and Siberia, but he needed funding for it, and so Will graciously decided to help him with that, and he also wanted to go see Alaska. And so on their way to Point Barrow, Alaska, they became lost in a heavy fog and were forced to land and ask for directions from some local Inuits. And when they tried to take off again, almost immediately after, their plane just failed and nosedived into a lagoon and killed them on impact.
From the state capitol, where Oklahoma paid its tribute of honor, the body of Wiley Post is taken for the funeral rites of religion. And his comrade Will Rogers on the same day is mourned by the motion picture world and the public, assembled in an immense throng in the Hollywood Bowl.
Spencer and Julie actually met Will Rogers one time when he stayed at the Broadmoor Hotel in 1926, and they did invite him to their El Pomar estate, but they weren't close friends with the humorist.
Spencer Penrose created the Into the Trail Association, a cemetery corporation, in September of 1934, knowing that it would be a burial place for both he and his wife. He dedicated it to Will Rogers, not because they were good friends, but because he admired Will Rogers for his politics, his sense of humor, and his love of America at the time.
However, when they held the dedication ceremony in honor of Will Rogers, they invited many of his friends to the ceremony. And coincidentally enough, the very first caretaker of the shrine was Rogers' niece, Laska Lane Luckett.
Will Rogers Mountain Memorial at sunrise. You look down on clouds, this pinnacle is so lofty. A lookout post on Cheyenne Mountain near Colorado Springs. A niece of the homespun humorist, and then taps by a cowboy bugler.
El Pomar's relationship with the shrine is El Pomar is now essentially the caretaker of the shrine. And originally, the shrine was placed in the end of the Trail Association, which Thayer Tut was in charge of until the shrine merged into the foundation a number of decades ago.
Mr. Penrose put my grandfather in charge of the shrine as its sole trustee. My uncle succeeded him, then my father succeeded him, and I succeeded my father, Russell Tutt, to carry on that tradition and legacy for generations to come. So I feel a real connection as well as responsibility to maintain the shrine as a symbol of the legacy of Spencer and Julie Penrose.